Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm joined by Dr. Amit Kumar, Chairman and CEO of Anixa Biosciences, NASDAQ, ticker symbol ANIX. Also joining us my Water Tower Research Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. Anixa is a clinical stage biotech company which uses a novel type of CAR T cell therapy for the treatment of terminally ill ovarian cancer patients. In addition, Anixa's clinical portfolio includes a vaccine for the treatment and prevention of breast cancer, and the company has additional pre-development candidates. So with that, let me say hello to Amit and Robert, and thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Very nice to talk to you, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
And good to be here too. And I'm very interested to hear about Anixa.
Yeah, likewise. So, Amit, let me start by the podcast by asking you to provide our listeners with a 30,000-foot overview of the company's business model, as well as a quick review of your professional background, please.
Sounds good. Let me just begin with my professional background. I'm a trained scientist. I started my advanced studies at Stanford University, got my PhD at Caltech, and completed a postdoctoral training at Harvard. This is 30 years ago, and came back to California and have been working in the biotech industry for the last 30 years as a scientist, executive, investor, board member, etc. I got involved with Anixa Biosciences 7 years ago. I took over as CEO. Anixa was previously an electronics company that had been founded in the 1980s, and it went through the decades through executing a number of different business models and trying to develop products in certain industries and failed miserably. I got involved in 2017, became the CEO of the company, and started building, or I should say, repositioned it as a biotech company and started building a portfolio of assets. And now we have a number of assets, two of which are in clinical trials, both producing very, very positive data. And we have a strong balance sheet, cash position. We have over 2 years of capital on the balance sheet. We have no debt, uh, very clean capital structure, no warrants, common stock only. And we're pretty excited about the position that the company is in and the data that our clinical trials are producing at the current time.
Well, thank you. That's a great introduction, and congratulations on the balance sheet strength. That's something we don't always see in small cap names, so that's great. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thank you, Amit, for your participation in this podcast. Your company is executing a very unique business model, so it has significant financial implications. So could you elaborate a little further on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that when biotech companies form, they typically build out very expensive infrastructure, big laboratories, lots of staff, scientists, physicians, engineers, technicians, a lot of very expensive equipment. And that creates a very big burn rate for biotech companies. We've decided that we're not going to do any of that. So we don't have any of our own laboratory facilities. We have a very small staff, and but we work with research teams across different organizations, including some of the most highly respected research institutions in the world that help us perform our research and also our clinical trials. In addition, we try and get as much non-dilutive funding as we possibly can. Either the money comes to us or the money comes to our research collaborators to perform the R&D as well as the clinical trials. So the bottom line there is that we are able to do everything that we have done and burn very little cash. In fact, since 2017, when I took over on an annual basis, we've been burning about $5 to $6 million a year, which is unheard of for biotech companies performing, clinical trials. And in last 12 months, we burned less than $7 million while running two clinical trials and covering all of the costs of being a public company. So we're pretty excited about that. We're always going to be fiscally very frugal. the business model enables us to do that, and that's all good for us as management. It's all great for shareholders, and going forward, I think this is going to turn into a very, very valuable business model for the company.
Okay, let's now talk about your your development pipeline in particular, because that's what makes your company. So if you can run through that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, we have two programs in the clinic. One is a CAR T program that addresses terminally ill ovarian cancer patients. These are patients that have failed every other therapy, up to 6 different therapies that are approved, and they are effectively given about 12 weeks of potential life expectancy. And then we get them and we are treating them with this CAR T therapy, which is a new type of immunotherapy that got people very excited a few years ago because of its success in certain leukemias and lymphomas, blood cancers. But since that time, CAR T therapy has not been very successful in any solid tumor. We're addressing a solid tumor, in fact, ovarian cancer, which is one of the most difficult cancers to treat. And we, that therapy, that trial is in early days. We've only treated 12 patients. We're still at the dose escalation stage, and we're getting great safety signals, and we're getting anecdotal evidence that it seems to be working in a number of patients. In fact, one of our patients is alive now almost 30 months. When she was expected to be gone in about 3. We have some additional patients that have outlived their mean expected lifetime. And we're still at doses which we think are, somewhat low. And as we go to higher doses, we believe that we will have more and more patients responding. And then the second program in the clinical trials is a breast cancer vaccine. This is designed to not only treat breast cancer, but also be prophylactic, meaning it's going to eventually prevent recurrence of breast cancer. And the holy grail is going to be able to give these shots to women who've never had breast cancer, but are concerned about breast cancer in the future to prevent breast cancer, sort of just like prophylactic vaccines are given for infectious diseases like polio and smallpox. And we've just completed the phase 1 study. That study was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, or I should say now it's called the Department of War. And that study is, we're compiling the data, analyzing all of the blood samples from our patients. We'll be presenting comprehensive data on that study at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Meeting, which is going to occur in the second week of December this year. And we're looking forward to putting all of that data out. We'll be preparing a report for the US DoD and a report for the US FDA. And then successive to that, we will start beginning to have discussions with the regulatory agencies, the FDA, to develop the plan for the phase 2. So those are the programs in the clinic. We have a number of other preclinical programs, but I'll leave it at the clinical programs for the time being.
Thank you for that. So obviously, let's turn to the technology. That's a really interesting area for me to learn more. Gene and cell therapy have been emerging for a few years, and certainly they're becoming a hot area. So
Yeah.
first, before we get into that into more detail, can you explain to our podcast listeners what T cells are and what role they play in the human body?
Yeah, T cells are a major component of the immune system. They're a type of white blood cell, and there are multiple types of T cells. And in fact, T cells, uh, certain type of T cell tends to be the soldier or the infantry of, if you're using a military analogy here, of the immune system. They'll often, certain T cells will regulate other T cells and other white blood cells. And other T cells will attack the disease, whether it's an infectious disease or cancer. These T cells need to be taught how to attack these diseases, and there's a internal process in the immune system that trains these T cells to recognize and attack bad things, bad cells, bad infections and cancer. But we have now learned how to manipulate these T cells. CAR T therapy, which is what I've mentioned earlier regarding the ovarian cancer trial. In that case, we actually modify the patient's individual T cells to attack the cancer. In other therapies, like our other vaccine, for example, the breast cancer vaccine, we're using the vaccine to train T cells of the patient, of the vaccinated patient, to target the cancer cells. So T cells are a major component. They are central to everything that we do. They're central to pretty much everything that most immunotherapy companies do. The detailed complexity of how these T cells work is perhaps beyond the scope of this discussion, but they're very important for therapies like this.
Right. So you mentioned CAR T, or we call it as in the fuller version, chimeric antigen receptor therapy. Now that's, as you mentioned a few moments ago, has revolutionized the treatment of blood cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. But its application in solid tumors, such as the ones that your company is targeting, have always been a challenge. So Anixa is adopting a novel type of CAR T known as chimeric endocrine receptor T cell, or SIR-T technology. So can you perhaps highlight the differences between CAR T and SIR-T and what you believe makes SIR-T therapy more effective for treating and preventing solid tumors?
Yeah, so there are three distinct differences between our approach and other approaches that have been tried in solid tumors. And one key point is that you referred to the chimeric endocrine receptor. We've identified a receptor that is an endocrine receptor. It's a hormone receptor that is only found on the ovaries in women and on the testes in men. And since we're dealing with women with ovarian cancer, we don't have to worry about the testes. We obviously focus on the ovaries. And as a result, we engineer our T cells to target only that endocrine receptor. And the way we target that receptor is not through traditional means, which involve creating an antibody on the surface of the T cell, or an antibody fragment, I should say, on the surface of the T cell. We actually use the hormone that ordinarily binds to the follicle stimulating hormone receptor. It's called the follicle stimulating hormone. And over millions or hundreds of millions of years of evolution in multiple species, including humans, it's become a very good homing missile that directs the T cell to the ovary cells, and then the T cell is able to destroy those ovary cells. So that's one key characteristic, and that's the endocrine part. Second characteristic is that we've learned recently that even though the receptor, follicle stimulating hormone receptor, is only found in the ovaries and testes, it turns out that when tumors form, the blood vessels nourishing those tumors also express that receptor. We don't fully understand why that is, but we know that they're there. So what that means is our T cells, our engineered T cells, are going to not only attack the ovaries directly, but they're also going to attract the blood vessels that are supplying blood to those tumor lesions. And so it's like a dual mechanism of action. It's the direct killing of the cells, cancer cells, as well as an anti-angiogenesis effect, meaning it destroys blood vessels, but only within the tumor, not outside the tumor. And so, this is a dual mechanism of action. It's like a combination therapy without the side effects of two therapies being used simultaneously. And then the third characteristic, and this is sort of unique for ovarian cancer, it turns out that ovarian cancer, except for the very, very latest stages, most ovarian cancer lesions remain in something called the peritoneum, which is an abdominal sac in which lots of organs exist. And in women, the ovaries exist in the peritoneum, peritoneal sac. And when the ovarian cancer starts spreading, it spreads to other organs within the peritoneal sac. And so instead of taking our engineered T cells and injecting them back into the patient through the vein, we're injecting them directly into the peritoneum through the abdomen. And so they go to the lesions, where the lesions are. They remain mostly in that peritoneum. They don't get into the system, into the blood vessels. So they don't have a chance to run around the whole body and cause untoward side effects, including sometimes deaths. One of the reasons we believe that CAR T has not worked in solid tumors is because you need higher doses. And unfortunately, if you're delivering CAR T cells through the vein, a very high dose can often create really bad side effects that'll often cause the demise of the patient. And so by delivering directly into the peritoneum where the cancer lesions exist, we believe that we're going to be able to go to much higher doses, much lower side effects. And that's what we're seeing so far. And now I want to be clear, we have extended the life of some of these patients, but we can't make any statistically relevant statements yet because it's such a small number of patients. So we can make anecdotal statements, and we haven't cured any of them yet. We have, in a number of cases, taken progressive disease and turned it into stable disease. In a number of cases, we have not demonstrated significant apoptosis, meaning death of cells in their tumors. But the tumors still remain, and we're hoping as we go to higher doses that we will be able to knock out the whole tumor and curatively treat these patients.
Sounds very encouraging, those first steps. So we'll definitely be interested in seeing what goes on further down the road. Now, in recent months, you have provided significant updates on your lead programs, especially your breast cancer vaccine trial. So can you run through the key takes from those updates and the next steps and milestones for each of those programs?
Yeah, the breast cancer vaccine program is a very exciting program, and it's all of the work has been funded by the U.S. Department of Defense because it's potentially a game-changing type of product. Imagine a world where you could give a series of shots to every woman who's who's concerned about getting breast cancer, and maybe prevent breast cancer in a large percentage, if not all of those women. That's the vision for this vaccine. We've just completed the phase 1 study, 35 women, small number, but a good enough number to get the appropriate safety data, which is typically the primary goal in a phase 1 study. And so we've demonstrated that the vaccine is safe. We don't see any side effects except for irritation at the sites of injection. And the vaccine involves 3 injections, 2 weeks apart, and each 2 weeks apart. And so the only side effect was irritation at the site of injection. None of our patients had abnormal lab values, myalgias, pain, headaches, diarrhea, any of those things that often you see with other types of vaccines. And that's important because one day the vision for this is to be able to give it to millions to hundreds of millions of women who are healthy at the time to prevent breast cancer in the future. And so that was a very, very big finding. And then the second finding that is critical is that we were able to show that a large percentage, 75% of these women were showing a very strong immune response, meaning we talked about T cells a little bit earlier, that T cells and other cells in the immune system were developing the ability to target and destroy the protein, which is the antigen that identifies the cancer cell. And so the vision for this product is to, give it to women, immunize women, through vaccination, train their immune systems to destroy cancer cells. And as you know, cancer arises initially as one bad cell, then becomes 2, then 4, 8, and continues reproducing until it becomes a huge tumor that you can see in a mammogram. And so if a woman has been properly vaccinated, then as soon as those initial cells, the 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells arise, the immune system will destroy those cells, and those cells will never have a chance to become a tumor. That's exactly what we saw in mice, and that's what we think we will see in humans based on the phase 1 study. Now, one thing that we haven't answered yet, and we'll answer in a phase 2, is how effective is it? Is it going to prevent 100% of cancers, breast cancers, like we saw in mice, or is it going to prevent 50% or 70% or 80%? And the only way you can do that study is to have a placebo group. And so phase 2 will have half the patients will get the vaccine, the other half will get a placebo, and then we'll look at the 2 different arms, and that'll give indication of effectiveness. So phase 1 showed safety and evidence of effectiveness. Phase 2 will quantitate that, and we're incredibly excited about seeing that data.
When do you actually, just to follow up on that, when do you actually expect to begin a phase 2?
We anticipate beginning phase 2 in next year. This year we'll complete the analysis of the phase 1 data, submit all of the data to the Department of Defense and the FDA, and begin discussions with the FDA. And then we have to begin recruitment of sites and all the various logistical things that need to be done to begin a phase 2. So most likely about a year from now.
Oh, okay. So finally, from me, I think we've already sort of skirted the subject, but maybe you can sort of add more color to speak about your balance sheet and cash burn situation, and particularly your financial strategy going forward to advance your programs.
Yeah, so we have 2.5 years of cash on the balance sheet. That's certainly enough to take us well into the next phase. But at some point, we will need some additional cash, and there are options to do that. One is to try and continue to get non-dilutive funding, and we have a number of grants that we have applied for, but there's a little bit of uncertainty about that in the current government situation. We don't think everything will be shut down. We think things that have merit will still get funding, and we feel our technology has that merit. So we hope to get some funding. And we will also look at speaking with pharmaceutical companies to partner with us to provide additional funding and infrastructure. Because the goal for us as a small company is to develop these products to a point where a pharma company will take it to commercialization. I mean, we just, as a small company, would never have the infrastructure and could build the infrastructure to distribute a breast cancer vaccine throughout the world, to hundreds of millions of patients. But companies like Pfizer and Merck could do that. And so eventually we want alliances with those companies. So while we don't need cash right now, at some point we will need capital, and there are a number of avenues for that.
Oh, well, thank you for all of that, those answers, Amit, and for giving us a better understanding of your clinical programs and the novel therapeutic approach that to treating breast and ovarian cancers. We'll definitely continue to monitor Anixa's progress in what could be a new disruptive treatment option for solid tumors. So we're definitely at some point we'd love to have you back on the podcast to see how you've progressed since now. Okay, back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Robert, and I definitely concur with your closing observations there. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Amit Kumar, Chairman and CEO of Anixa Biosciences, NASDAQ ticker symbol ANIX. And thanks to my equity research colleague, Robert Sassoon, for also joining us. Lastly, a special thanks to the WTR producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast.